When I was looking at this play first, I think, and perhaps I share with you, the first thing that came into my mind, it reminded me in some ways of the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. You remember that? A novel written in 1961, but really set in the 1930s. And again, remember Miss Jean Brodie picks the creme de la creme of the girls, and they're her girls, and she is, at the end, betrayed by one of those girls. But I think even a more perhaps apt contemporary or modern novel based on this scenario is, do you know Dorothy Sayers' Gaudy Night? Yeah. Remember that? Dorothy Sayers, one of the Lord Peter Wimsey novels, and it's set in a Cambridge college. Now, Jean Wade is from Girton College, so we're in the Oxbridge system here. And there are malicious pranks. And the perpetrator, as we say, is a woman who really resents women academics. It interests me, thinking about this in terms of what I'm talking about today, is the matter of women's education, or women's higher education, that kind of weaves through Gaudy Night, and that idea that women should have access to higher education. The prankster in Gaudy Night doesn't believe. She's angry because her husband, who is dead, has been dismissed from the college, and there's all kinds of complications. But I think the important thing here in Gaudy Night is the right to women's higher education. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. And actually, this French school at Bray, and your program notes give you a wonderful profile of Hazel Ellis and the French school at Bray, from a little history of the school. It kind of sort of straddles a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about. You know that Hazel Ellis was a member of the company of the Gate Theater, Micheál MacLiammóir and Hilton Edwards. And she wrote two plays, one called Portrait in Marble about Byron, which of course MacLiammóir loved because he was Byron. And it was a great success in Dublin and in Cairo. They used to go out in the winter to Cairo, and that was a great success. And MacLiammóir talks about a group of Alexandrian Greeks coming into his dressing room and just saying what a wonderful Byron he was. And of course, you know, MacLiammóir would have absolutely adored that. But my brief is to talk about the education background, and it's kind of interesting how it plays out with this play this afternoon. I want to say first that, because I bet some of you in the audience saw the late Brian Friel's wonderful play Translations. Remember, years ago it was done down at the Roundabout. And you remember that there's a head schoolmaster, and before the British introduced the national schools in Ireland, there were these head schoolmasters who ran kind of informal local schools. What were the subjects? Classics and mathematics. And you might remember the schoolmaster in the Brian Friel play, based on a character in a William Carleton story, with this kind of extravagant language. Carleton and his schoolmaster asks for a drink of water and says if he doesn't get a drink of water, he says, "Quicken me with the hydraulics," for his glass of water. And I know a lot of you know The Plough and the Stars, the Sean O'Casey play, and the Abbey's coming this year because of the 1916 centenary. Of course, it's a crazy choice. It's a most cynical play about 1916. But Fluther Good comes in and he fixes the door, and the woman of the house is going to give him some money, and she said, "I suppose this will buy a pint for you, Fluther." "Fluther's on the water wagon now," and you can say, and he goes. And I think one of the things I want to say about that and about translations and so forth is that we see this, especially in O'Casey's Slum People, is that they make up for the poverty in their life by extravagant language. Now, in 1830, when the British introduced the national school system to Ireland, and they introduced it to Ireland before it came to the United Kingdom, why did they do it? Because after the rebellion of 1798, they wanted to copper fasten this Act of Union. And they wanted the Irish to be loyal citizens of the Union, and they wanted them to know English. And if you remember in translations, there is a young woman, Moira, and she doesn't care about the Latin and Greek. She wants to learn English because she's going to America. And so we have that, we have this introduction of the national schools in the 1830s, and it doesn't quite replace the national schools immediately. There's an American woman called Asenath Nicholson. I wrote a biography of her. She walks through Ireland before the Great Irish Famine, and she goes back and does famine relief. And she visits a national school, but she's more interested in the matter of class and gender and religion even. And so she goes down to Dingle, to the Protestant mission in Dingle, and she says to the young woman school teacher, where are the maps for the girls? Oh, she said, the girls don't have maps, only for boys, because they are the children of the lower order, and we know what's best for them. Next day she goes to the presentation sisters, and it's a big class, and she asks about them. And the presentation nun says, although our children are the children of the poor, we do not know what God has in store for them. And so we must give them all the education that we can, because we don't know what's going to be happening for them. Nicholson goes on from there, and as I say, the famine comes and things change utterly, as Yeats would say. We have if I had a cloak of dreams that we had in the film this afternoon. But it's after the famine. We begin after the famine because those little lands, those little fields are gone, the little farms are gone, and we begin to start building strong farmers and a kind of commercial middle class. And that's when we begin to think about education, and particularly education for young women. And the education for young women, it's sort of the second half of the 19th century that we begin to see it. It starts in Northern Ireland with Protestant women. It starts with Margaret Byers, a County Down woman who starts the Victoria College. And college, by the way, is secondary school. We use a different word here. And she, her experience was informed by spending time in Princeton. She got lecturers from Queens to teach her girls at Alexandria College. The most important, though, was a woman called Angelico in Dublin, and she is the daughter of a Quaker school teacher. Now, the Quaker school teacher offers all the subjects, but she's educated at home by governesses. And she realizes that if women are going to make any difference in literature and politics and in the wider world, they have to have a college education. And how will they get a college education? Well, she has to do something about the secondary schools. So she starts she starts Alexandra College, which is based on Queen's College in Harley Street in London. Remember the place with all of the doctors there. And in the beginning, she thinks about it as a place to train governesses. Like Connors here, who was concerned about how is she going to make it. She wants to train governesses, and so that they have a way, if there's no family money, that they have a way to make a living. She also wants to, and Alexandra has a big tradition of educating for very little or for nothing the children of the girls of Church of Ireland clergy. And indeed, I knew the Alex girls when I was a student in Dublin 50 years ago, and I laughed because for the very first thing, remember Strong is making the bath list, and they're talking about hot water and baths. Well, the clergy daughters got only one bath a week, because they were going to school for free. And I knew some of these clergy daughters as older women, and they were very resentful of their one bath a week. When Angelico started Alexandra College, she offered a perspective of courses, and they're interesting courses, folks, because it is such a wide, it's literature, it's history. The Europeans, as you know, teach geography really seriously, not like what we do here. They really know their geography. They do natural science, they do philosophy, they do drawing, they do phys ed, they do drill. They do mathematics and Latin. Now, why is mathematics and Latin important? And notice it's Connors who's teaching mathematics and Latin. We bring it up here. Connors is teaching mathematics and Latin. Why is it important? Because they're matriculation subjects for the university. And so that's what they need to know it. Hazel's school, Hazel Ellis' school, is somewhat along the Alex model that was set up by Anne Jellicoe. In fact, both women who set up these schools, Alexandra and the French School for Girls in Bray, would have been suffragettes. And the women were working for the vote, and then the 1916 Rising, the centenary is this year, 1916 Rising comes up, and women put aside their suffrage crusade for the Irish Revolution. The historian Margaret McCurtain has written a very important essay called Women, the Vote and Revolution, which really outlines all of this, and you'll be hearing about it probably this year as people are starting to talk about the 1916 Rising. So this is the Alex situation. As I say, Anne Jellicoe says secondary school, she's going to make sure that the girls have the tuition in the subjects, and she gets Trinity men to come in, the Trinity lecturers to come in and teach the girls these subjects, because, as I say, she said, until they can get a university degree, they're not going to be taken seriously. And girls are not admitted, by the way, to Trinity till 1903. Now remember that Trinity was founded by Queen Elizabeth numero uno, Queen Elizabeth I. So it's a 16th century institution. Women can't get in until 1903. Catholic girls' education was completely different. And our Mademoiselle, of course, Hazel Ellis would have known Mademoiselle, and if there's a mention of the French school and the little history of the French school written that has been published in the last few years. So certainly the French presence would be important, and the Mademoiselle herself would have been, I'm sure, based on somebody that Hazel Ellis knew as a schoolgirl. But the Catholic education was very different. Protestant girls, math, Latin, getting their credentials so that they can go to Trinity, they can go to the Oxbridge system. And by the way, at the French school in Bray, they didn't take the Irish school leaving exams, they took the GCEs at the time, which were the exams for the British system. So you can see which way they're going. But Catholic education for girls, for the emerging middle class girls, was kind of interesting because the Catholics believed that their girls should be trained to be mothers, to be wives and mothers, or to enter religious life. Wives, mothers, and religious life. And so there were day schools and boarding schools, and the boarding schools had a certain cachet that existed certainly down to my student days, when I could tell as soon as somebody opened her mouth whether she went to Alexandra College, who talked in a sort of BBC accent, or whether she was educated by the Madams of the Sacred Heart, who had a very effective way of speaking indeed. And they were, again, they didn't do the subjects that I mentioned. They weren't strong, for example, in mathematics. I have a friend who was an architect, and she went to the Dominicans, Muckross College, and the Dominicans have the best reputation for scholarship at secondary level. They didn't have advanced math. They would let Island go down to the Bolton Street Tech every afternoon to do math and physics down there. She did her architecture, and if you see these little films of Queen Elizabeth visiting Ireland, it's Island who's taking her around and showing her the work she did on the restoration of the Rock of Cashel. Now, as I say, there is a kind of difference there between the Catholic schools, which were educated along the French order and very big on deportment and politesse and all of that kind of thing, and the Protestant schools. But what happened was all of that changed, as Yates would say, changed utterly in 1878 when they passed what's called the Intermediate Education Act. And what that said was that there would be competitive exams, and the kids, if they did well on the exams, would get money, and the schools would get prestige. If you remember Portrait of an Artist, Stephen Dedalus, maybe chapter 3 or 4, Stephen Dedalus wins all kinds of prizes. And you know, the father is a complete waster and a completely impossible provider. But the money comes in, Stephen wins all the money, and so for about 6 weeks they have all kinds of nifty food in the house. He takes them on theater parties and gives them chocolates and all kinds of things. Then the money is gone and that's it. But this Education Act was really, really important because what happened was we had two streams, the girls and the Catholic girls, Protestant girls. Education Act comes in, and of course, the Alexandra girls were off to the races, winning the prizes, and the Catholics, it got to be a bit of rivalry here, and all of a sudden they're being outpaced by the girls. And so the Dominicans quickly said, let's have those subjects, let's have that preparation at Eccles Street. Bishop wasn't sure he liked it, but he was in a tough place. Did he want he believed that girls should be educated to be wives and mothers, but the Protestants were beating them at these exams. So, and then some Catholics were saying, I want to get in on these exams, so I'm going to go to Alexandra College. I'm going to go to the Protestant secondary school so I can be trained and win those prizes. So the bishop was a little stuck at that point, and they allowed them to do that. They allowed them to begin, and there was tremendous rivalry. In fact, I was recalling when they were talking about the hockey match when the young women there wanted to go to the Peggy, I guess, wanted to go to the hockey match. I remembered not only was there competition for the intermediate exams, but when Alexandra College, the Protestant girls, played Muckross, the Catholic girls, the nuns sewed miraculous medals onto their knickers so they would beat them. So that's what to say. What can we say by the changes that we get in the 19th century? The main change is a stress on the public examination results meant the raising of standards, particularly for the Catholic girls who were taught to be wives and mothers. Stress on, as I say, stress on the public examinations. The inclusion for girls hadn't been taught this before, but again, Latin and mathematics. The liaison between, the connection between the secondary school and the university, because the very next year in 1879, with the Royal University Act, this is the first time that girls can take the exams. Now, the Royal University was not a teaching institution. It was an examining body. When Stephen Dedalus goes to the Royal University, that's an examining body. You can study any place you want. That lets you take the exams. But they wouldn't let girls attend the classes. So there again, the Dominicans say, okay, we'll start our own place, St. Mary's, and prepare the girls there. And Alexandra has the Trinity men come and train their people as well. We have the other thing that's kind of interesting is the Cardinal Paul Cullen, who again is a man who believed that Catholic girls should be mothers and wives and members of religious orders. He brings in all kinds of continental religious orders. He brings in I have them here, the Sacred Hearts, the Faithful Companions of Jesus, the St. Louis, and the St. Joseph of Cluny. Now, the Dominicans have been there since the 17th century, and the Lorettos as well. So one of the things that happens is Catholic girls' education in Ireland in the 19th, and indeed in the 20th century, was dominated by continental religious orders, not by Irish religious orders. And why the interest in France? The French, as I say, the sort of politesse, and those were the orders, but they also believed, a lot of the clergy believed, that if the girls were educated in a kind of French sensibility, it would be a kind of counter to the anglicized British influence that they would see, and that would certainly be the influence in Alexandra. So I just want to say, by way of the last thing, what we see in the beginning of the 20th century, remember I said women and the Catholic girls who were educated, nuns or wives and mothers, and then they begin to upgrade their education. They make them competitive in the intermediate exams. They start to pass exams and can start going to University College Dublin when the colleges are set up in 1908. But then they begin to open jobs, what we used to say permanent and pensionable, civil service jobs, like the post office is the first that opened, or other clerical jobs in the civil service. And we begin to see opportunities for girls who have to make their own way. The 1911 census shows a terrific percentage of unmarried women. And if you think that between 1883 and 1908, 310,000 Irish girls came through the port of New York. That's taking that single, and mostly single girls, that takes that big group, and they still have a high percentage of unmarried girls. By the 1921 census, when you think 49,000 Irish died on the Western Front in the First World War, we see the same thing again. So we have now we have an opportunity for girls to work, but at marriage, they have to resign from the civil service.